"Land that helicopter or you'll be arrested." That's what she screamed as the rescue helicopter circled above my property to save a boy fighting for his life. She stood in the middle of the makeshift landing zone, waving a fake badge like it meant something. And for a split second, time froze. Parents watched in horror. A child was dying, and a woman drunk on fake authority was willing to let him slip away. But what she didn't know, what none of us knew then, was that in just 7 minutes, SWAT would arrive, not for the helicopter, for her, because this wasn't just about a landing zone. This was about control, power, and the moment when a paper empire built on lies finally collapsed. It all began 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday so quiet it almost dared the storm to come. My kids and I were in the garden Sarah had built before. She passed, watering tomatoes under a sun already boiling by 8 a.m. It felt like a small victory to hold on to something she left behind. But victory didn't last long that morning. She marched across the lawn like a soldier on a mission, heels stabbing the earth like it had wronged her. Clipboard, name tag, and that look. The look of someone who had found religion in community. Ordinances. Her name was Karen Blackwood, HOA compliance officer. At least that's what her badge said. "Jake Fletcher, your fruit trees violate Article 8.3. 4 feet max height near boundaries. You have 48 hours. I told her we didn't even have an HOA when we bought the house. Those trees were here long before any of her bylaws existed. She didn't blink, just scribbled like she was writing my obituary. That evening, after tucking Ethan and Lily into bed, I opened a letter from the county. Not a warning, an official summons, charges, urban planning violations. It was so absurd, I almost laughed. Then I remembered Sarah's hands in that soil. Her voice telling the kids that every apple tree was a promise of something lasting. I wasn't about to let someone like Karen erase that. The next day, I did what any father would do. I started digging. Her Facebook, a catalog of neighborhood complaints, mailboxes the wrong shade, bikes left outside, grass too long by an inch. But what turned my stomach were the posts about my kids. Photos of them. One of Lily getting dressed. In her room taken from outside, 43 likes, no outrage, just community enforcement. That night I called Marcus. "Jake," he said, "I've been waiting for someone to fight her." He had drone footage. Cameras. 12 of them. Hidden. Watching. And my house? It had more coverage than a casino. One of them was in a tree outside Lily's window. Months of weathering. On the screws. She'd been watching us since we moved in. Not since the violations. Since the beginning. Marcus and I started documenting everything. Every angle. Every camera. The system she built wasn't amateur. It was surgical. Targeted. Families. With kids, elderly folks. Anyone who resisted her rules. We took it to the only person we thought might care, Deputy Rodriguez. We went to high school together. He looked at the footage and his jaw clenched. This is felony-level stuff. But he warned us. Karen had connections. Donated to the sheriff's campaign. Sat on charity boards. Took pictures with people who held power. Taking her down wouldn't be about truth. It had to be undeniable. So we built a case, piece by piece, until the day the email came. Final notice. It read, but it wasn't just a warning. It was a broadcast. 53 families, infractions, aerial photos, and a paragraph painting me as a dangerous man, caught doing suspicious nighttime activity. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was turning the neighborhood against me. Marcus read the email and said, "Maybe it's time we let her win, just long enough for her to lose everything." 3 days later, I hired Tom Brennan, private investigator, former FBI, gravel voice. No patience for nonsense. What he uncovered changed everything. Karen Blackwood doesn't exist, he said. Her real name was Brenda Kowalski. Fired for selling fake security clearances, 3 restraining orders, surveillance, harassment, false reports. Her blueprint of control went back a decade. Her mother, Betty, the HOA treasurer, unwitting accomplice. Karen had stolen $34,000 through fake invoices and maintenance scams. She was looting the neighborhood while pretending to protect it. The hardest part? Telling Betty. She told me she was helping other communities, Betty whispered. She was stealing from them, I replied. That night, Betty agreed to help. She had access to the records, proof, but we weren't ready for what came next. A man in our driveway, taking pictures, dressed like law enforcement, badge, vest, car that looked like a cruiser. Chief Hammerstein, he said. HOA enforcement. It was a joke. But he didn't laugh, claimed authority, claimed jurisdiction. And Karen stood beside him like a queen finally getting her army. 3 days later, he blocked Marcus's driveway. His grandmother was having a heart attack. The ambulance had to park 2 blocks away. She almost died. That's when we knew this wasn't just corruption. It was violence, waiting for an excuse. Karen called an emergency meeting, showed slides of my family, labeled us threats. But what she didn't know was who sat in the audience, Judge Winters. Miss Blackwood, the judge said, her voice calm and terrifying, impersonating an officer is a felony. Blocking emergency services is a federal crime. Trevor puffed his chest. HOA enforcement, he replied. She cut him down with a single phrase. You're going to prison. That night, Karen taped off my driveway, wrote crime scene in Sharpie. I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready, because tomorrow I was going to end this. They say you don't really know your neighbors until something goes wrong. But nothing could have prepared us for what was hiding behind the clipped hedges and smiling mailboxes of Sunset Ridge. I remember the way the shadows looked. That morning. Long. Still. Like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I stood on my front porch, holding a matchbox-sized surveillance camera in one hand and a mug of cold coffee in the other. That camera had watched my daughter sleep, watched my son play basketball. It had witnessed everything, and said nothing. But now I was going to speak for it. I drove to Marcus's house without calling first. I didn't need to. He was already waiting. He'd pulled out all his drone equipment. 3 laptops running heat maps, image reconstructions, a digital mapping interface of the neighborhood. His face was different now, less guarded, more like a man who'd been quiet for too long and finally had something worth shouting about. This isn't just about your family, Jake, he said. This is about control. Karen built a system, an actual network, with rules, priorities, targets. He pulled up a heat map of our neighborhood, 12 homes in red, all homes with kids, elderly folks, people who'd questioned the HOA. She's not just spying, she's building cases. She's crafting stories. One day you get a fine for a 4-inch grass violation. Next week, you're labeled a non-compliant risk to property values. And then suddenly, the neighborhood starts looking at you like you're the threat. I stared at the screen, and I saw it. Our lives turned into evidence. Karen hadn't just created a homeowners association. She'd created a dictatorship, one where she wore the badge, wrote the laws, and decided who was dangerous. That afternoon, I drove out to the county courthouse, not to file a complaint, not to rant, but to find one person I hoped would still believe in justice. Deputy Rodriguez. We hadn't talked much in years, but we'd grown up together, played football on the same muddy Texas field. He'd been Sarah's friend before he was mine. He met me in the parking lot with tired eyes and a badge that still meant something. I didn't waste time. I handed him the surveillance camera, pulled out Marcus's drone footage, showed him the heat maps, the pattern. This isn't about property lines anymore, I said quietly. It's about children being filmed through their windows. Rodriguez didn't say a word for a long time. Then he looked at me with the kind of expression you only see on people who've stared at something too ugly to turn away from. Jake, this is felony-level stuff. I could arrest her right now for half of what's on that footage, but it won't stick. What do you mean? She's been playing a longer game than you realize, donating to campaigns, volunteering for officials, spouses, building relationships with people who matter. If we come at her now, she'll bury this. And you. He looked over his shoulder, as if the walls had ears. If we're gonna take her down, he said, we need something bigger. Something no one can ignore. and we need to make her believe she's still in control. That night, Marcus and I made a decision. We were going to let Karen believe she'd won. We started complying, trimmed the apple trees, repainted the mailbox. I even moved Sarah's garden gnomes to the approved HOA locations, whatever that meant. And while I played the role of defeated homeowner, Marcus played surveillance on the spy. We tracked her routes, her schedule, her data points. Turns out Karen didn't sleep much. Most nights she patrolled in that old golf cart with a mounted spotlight, like she was guarding a prison yard instead of a cul-de-sac. 3 days later, the storm came back. Only. This time it wore a badge. I was sipping coffee on the porch when a Ford Crown Vic pulled into my driveway, lights flashing, decals that mimicked the county sheriff's logo just closely enough to look real to the untrained eye. Out stepped Trevor Hammerstein. He was every bad stereotype rolled into one. Thick neck, buzz cut, mirrored sunglasses, tactical vest too, sizes too small. His badge said, Chief of Security, HOA Enforcement Division. It looked like it had been printed at a kid's birthday party. Behind him, Karen stood holding a clipboard like a judge at a sentencing. Mr. Fletcher, she said with theatrical gravity, you've been flagged for unauthorized agricultural development and perimeter obstruction. Perimeter obstruction? I echoed. Your compost bin is 2 inches beyond regulation distance from your rear fence. Trevor stepped forward and began snapping photos like we were a crime scene. Any further noncompliance may result in property forfeiture, Karen said. HOA Charter subsection 14C allows for emergency seizure in the interest of community safety. Are you insane? I said, my voice cracking. This is my backyard. It's tomatoes and cucumbers, not a drug lab. Trevor didn't blink. Sir, please step back. Interfering with an HOA officer's investigation is a misdemeanor offense. HOAs don't have officers, I snapped, and you're not law enforcement. Karen's voice cut in like a blade. Actually, our charter authorizes us to deputize private contractors for safety enforcement. I laughed. But it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. And it got worse. 3 nights later, Marcus called. Panicked. Jake. They blocked my grandmother's ambulance. I nearly dropped the phone. Blocked it? She had chest pains. I called 911, but Trevor parked that fake cop car across the only access street. Said they needed HOA transport authorization before letting EMS through. Paramedics had to park 2 blocks away and carry her out on a stretcher. She's okay? Barely. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't fines and grass height violations. It was obstruction of medical aid, of life and death. Karen had drawn a line in the sand, and now she'd crossed it. The next day, the neighborhood got an email. Subject line, final notice, safety. Enforcement update. It was a mass email from Karen sent to 53 families. It included aerial photos of my property, taken from unknown angles, and labeled with red circles around infractions. Compost bin, garden hose, an old ladder Sarah used to paint the barn. But what turned my stomach was the last paragraph. Read, residents should be aware that Mr. Fletcher has been observed conducting suspicious activities around neighboring properties after dark. Please report any unusual behavior to HOA security immediately. Your family's safety depends on vigilance. She'd gone from fines to full-on character assassination. She was painting me as the threat, turning neighbors against me. I called Marcus. My hands were shaking. She's trying to isolate us, I said, to make me look dangerous, unstable. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, then maybe it's time to show the world who the real threat is. We made a plan. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She thought her badge and her clipboard gave her power. But what she didn't know, what she never imagined, was that we had her own mother on our side. It started with a phone call. Betty. Kowalski. HOA treasurer. Quiet woman with tired eyes and soft cardigans. I told her everything. About the fake name, the restraining orders, the surveillance network, the embezzlement, money stolen under her name. There was silence on the line for a long time, then, tell me what you need me to do? And just like that, the final piece of Karen's empire began to crack. Betty gave us access to financial records, 8 terabytes of data, transactions, invoices, fake improvement projects that never happened. It was worse than we thought. $34,000. Gone in 18 months, all funneled into security enhancements and property compliance audits. That's when we called Tom Brennan, a retired federal investigator with a reputation for digging deeper than anyone wanted him to. When he saw what we had, he didn't hesitate. "I've worked RICO cases with less," he said. "Give me a week. I'll find her skeletons." He didn't need that long. 3 days later, I sat in Murphy's diner with a manila folder in front of me. Inside, it wasn't Karen Blackwood. It was Brenda Kowalski, fired from a security firm for faking. Clearances tied to employee fraud, under investigation for harassment in 3 states, restraining orders, false reports, patterns of obsession and control. She hadn't just faked authority. She'd built an entire life on it. I walked out of that diner feeling like I'd just stepped off the edge of a cliff. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was criminal, organized, and soon it would be public. We were about to blow the lid off everything, but the scariest part? Karen still thought she was in control, still thought she was untouchable, still thought her little empire of fear could hold together with nothing but printed rules and plastic badges. But tomorrow, the real authorities would knock on her door, and nothing, not her lies, her clipboard, or her crooked empire, could stop what was coming. Because this time, the HOA wasn't sending a violation notice. It was sending SWAT. You never forget the sound of chains breaking. Not real chains. Not the kind that rattle on prison gates or lock up criminals. I mean the invisible ones. The ones you never see until they're gone. Guilt, fear, shame, silence. That night, after the arrests, after the helicopters left and the barricades came down, I walked through Sunset Ridge for the first time without looking over my shoulder. The air felt different, lighter, realer. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact in years were suddenly talking again, laughing, hugging, like survivors crawling out of a cave. Marcus stood outside his house with his arm around his grandmother. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "I forgot what peace felt like. I hadn't cried since Sarah died." That night, I did. But Karen's story wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after the raid, I sat down with Betty Kowalski, Karen's mother. The woman who had unknowingly funded her daughter's crimes smiled through board meetings, handed out flyers while her bank account was being used to steal from the people she lived among. She looked like someone who'd aged 10 years overnight. "Should have seen it," she said. "I kept hoping she was just going through something, that if I supported her long enough, she'd come back to me." I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone who realizes they raised a monster? "Betty," I said gently, "you did what any mother would. You tried to believe in her." She shook her head, tears filling her tired eyes. "No. I enabled her. And now people are hurting because I couldn't face the truth." But then she reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything," she whispered. "Every transaction, every forged signature, every fake invoice. I've been quietly backing up records for months. I didn't know why, I just felt like something wasn't right. That flash drive? It would become the nail in Karen's coffin." Federal investigators took one look and launched an immediate RICO case: racketeering, fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. And it wasn't just our neighborhood. Karen's fingerprints were all over 50 other HOA accounts across 3 states. She had created shell HOAs, filed fake charters, and used them to move millions in community fees to her own private accounts, all hidden behind smiling logos and promises of neighborhood safety. Her empire wasn't suburban, it was criminal, and it was massive. Trevor Hammerstein, her so-called security chief, folded almost immediately. Turns out he had a rap sheet of his own. 3 arrests for impersonating law enforcement in other states, all dropped thanks to technicalities. But this time, there were no loopholes. Under pressure, he admitted everything. The fake police gear, the intimidation tactics, the plan to escalate. a compliance into full-blown paramilitary enforcement. That arsenal we'd found was meant for a worst-case scenario, a list titled Operation Sweep. 47 families labeled non-compliant, each one marked with psychological notes, pressure points, schedules, weaknesses. My family was at the top of that list, and suddenly I realized how close we had come to losing everything. Karen hadn't just wanted to scare us. She wanted to erase us, remove us like weeds from a garden she believed she owned. I stared at the document for hours, and in every word, every cold note about Ethan and Lily's school schedules, about Sarah's garden, about where I parked my truck and what time I took out the trash, all I saw was sickness, but also proof that what we'd fought for mattered. The news broke nationally. 3 days later, HOA horror, fake cops, real crimes, and a $50 million suburban empire. Footage from Marcus's drone. Body cam footage from SWAT. Karen's meltdown, screaming at a rescue helicopter, was played on every major network. The headline under it read, HOA president tries to block medical helicopter, arrested by SWAT. But what hit me hardest was watching Ethan read the news at the kitchen table. He was quiet. His eyes focused. Then he looked at me and said, "So, it's over now?" And I realized something. I didn't know how to answer. Because legally, it was just beginning. Karen was being extradited on 25 federal charges, including surveillance, crimes, obstruction of emergency medical aid, conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, and wire fraud. Trevor had taken a plea deal. Betty had agreed to testify against her own daughter. And our neighborhood, we were rebuilding. The HOA charter was dissolved within 72 hours of the raid. The board resigned. All funds were frozen. A temporary oversight committee was formed, not to enforce rules, but to protect residents while the investigation unfolded. And then something beautiful happened. Neighbors, once afraid to wave, started organizing food drives. Lawn signs changed from compliance zone to community first. We took down the fake cameras, removed the security signs, and replaced them with handmade ones. Welcome, friends. Garden open. For all. One Saturday, Marcus and I stood in the middle of Sarah's old garden, now expanded into a full community plot. Dozens of families were there, planting, building, painting. Kids laughed while dragging bags of mulch. Grown men cried while hammering new fence posts. Deputy Rodriguez pulled up in his cruiser and stepped out with his son, Mason, the boy whose life Karen had nearly destroyed by blocking that helicopter. Mason ran straight to the garden beds and pointed. "That one," he said. "That's where I'm planting my tomatoes." Rodriguez put a hand on my shoulder. "Jake, thank you for not giving up." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I think Sarah would have loved this. She's proud," he said, "wherever she is." That night, I found myself staring at her old gardening gloves still hanging by the back door, dirt-stained, worn through the palms, but still holding their shape. I slipped them on, felt her hands in mine, and smiled. Karen had tried to break something sacred, but all she did was prove how strong it really was. In the following weeks, the FBI invited me to give a statement for a federal oversight hearing on community organizations and abuse of power. I was nervous, but Marcus came with me. So did Rodriguez, and so did Betty. At the end of my testimony, I said something I hadn't planned. I looked directly at the senators and said, "Authority without accountability becomes tyranny, and when the quiet people stand up, tyrants fall." There was silence. Then applause. I didn't do it for praise. I did it for Sarah, for Ethan and Lily, for every child who deserves to feel safe in their own home. And when I got back home, waiting in my mailbox was a letter from the nationwide HOA Reform Alliance. It read, "Mr. Fletcher, we represent over 24 communities dealing with similar abuses. We'd like to invite you to consult on a national framework for ethical neighborhood governance. We believe your story can help others fight back. I folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and looked out at the community garden blooming under the Texas sun. Sarah's garden. Our garden. A movement born from the ashes of tyranny. Karen thought she could build a kingdom on fear. Instead, she built a revolution. 6 months after the raid, I got a letter I never expected. It was from a woman in Oregon, a stranger, handwritten, torn edges. Ink slightly smudged like someone had cried while writing it. She'd seen the story, the footage, the helicopter, the cameras. She wrote, "My daughter was filmed in her bedroom too. The HOA called it property evaluation. We didn't fight back. I wish we had. Thank you for showing us how." That letter broke me. Not because it was rare, but because it wasn't. Every week, more came. From Florida, Montana, Arizona. People who had lived under invisible dictatorships for years. People who'd been fined, threatened, surveilled. All. Under the banner of community safety. What we went through in Sunset Ridge, it wasn't isolated, it was a blueprint. And suddenly, our little war wasn't just ours anymore, it was a movement. They called it the Garden Rebellion. Started as a hashtag, a joke, really. Something Marcus posted under a photo of our community plot with the caption, "Turns out the best way to fight tyranny is with tomatoes." But it caught fire. Within weeks, communities from across the country were tearing down HOA cameras, filing for charter audits, and replacing compliance zones with garden zones. People were waking up, and I was right in the middle of it. Not because I wanted to be, but because the story kept growing. First came the news interviews, then the podcasts, then the Senate invitation, and through it all, I kept asking myself, what, why? Would Sarah do? She would have stayed grounded, humble. She would have reminded me that change doesn't happen in hearings or hashtags. It happens in backyards, in conversations, in people remembering how to trust each other again. That's what we focused on. One day at a time, one raised bed at a time, one healing conversation at a time. The community garden had tripled in size. Sarah's old compost bins were now part of a full sustainability program. Ethan taught younger kids how to build irrigation systems. Lily painted signs that said things like, "Grow together and no cameras, just carrots." And me? I stopped, fighting shadows, and started planting again. One morning, I was setting up new soil bags when a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man in a federal windbreaker stepped out. Kind eyes, firm handshake. "Mr. Fletcher," he said. "My name is Director Palmer. I work with the HOA fraud task force under the DOJ. Mind if I take a walk?" We strolled through the garden paths. Mason Rodriguez waved from the compost station. The Cooper twins were wrestling with a stubborn wheelbarrow. Everything smelled like rosemary and soil and sunlight. Palmer took a deep breath. "This," he said, "is what America's supposed to feel like." Then he got serious. "We've been investigating Karen's network. We now believe she was the central node in a coordinated scam stretching across 15 states. Fake HOAs, ghost accounts, over $50 million stolen." I stopped walking. 50 million. Palmer nodded. She was a master manipulator, created authority out of thin air, exploited bureaucracy, weaponized fear. He turned to face me. "But here's the thing. You're the first person who didn't just report it. You built a counter-narrative. You gave people something real to believe in again." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a grant, federal $150,000 to expand Sarah's garden into a national pilot program for neighborhood resilience hubs. Community-run alternatives to HOAs focused on empowerment, education, and local food security. Couldn't speak, just nodded. Palmer smiled and added, "You turned a surveillance state into a sanctuary. That's leadership, Mr. Fletcher, whether you wanted it or not." When he left, I sat on the porch in Sarah's old rocking chair and just breathed. I thought about every step that led here. The fake badge, the cameras in Lily's window, the helicopter circling while a child fought to live, and then I thought about now, kids planting, neighbors laughing, a community reborn. It didn't erase the pain, didn't bring Sarah back, but it mattered. and I was beginning to understand something. Sometimes, the best revenge is rebuilding in public. That night, I made a choice. I accepted the grant. I called up Marcus, Deputy Rodriguez, and Betty Kowalski, and together we began laying the foundation for the Sunset Ridge Freedom Model, a template for how communities could take back control without losing compassion. The first rule: no surveillance. The second: no enforcement by fear. The third: every decision must begin and end with the question, does this build trust? 3 weeks later, I was planting cucumbers when Patricia Winters showed up, the judge, the woman who had stood up to Karen at that HOA meeting, the one whose courtroom had quietly dismantled dozens of suburban con artists just like her. She looked different outside the courthouse, looser, in jeans and sneakers, hair in a ponytail, holding a bottle of sweet tea. Did I miss the composting demo? She asked. I laughed. You're just in time. She stayed for hours, helped Lily paint new signs, talked constitutional law with Ethan, sat with me in the shade, sharing stories about growing up in a neighborhood where the scariest thing was forgetting to return your neighbor's pie dish. That night, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees, she looked at me and said, Jake, I've seen hundreds of people fight the system, but you rebuilt the system. You didn't just win. You changed the game. I didn't know what to say, but I knew how I felt. Seen. Finally. Weeks passed. The movement kept growing. The Garden Rebellion became more than a hashtag. It became a mission. Communities across the country launched their own freedom plots. Retired vet in Nevada turned his lawn into a free produce stand. A single mom in Georgia sued her HOA and used the settlement to build a neighborhood library. Even Marcus, who once swore he'd never leave his garage, was now consulting with cybersecurity teams on how to dismantle illegal surveillance in private communities. Trevor Hammerstein? 12 years in federal prison. His fake police cruiser? Marcus bought it at auction, painted it bright pink, added a rainbow flag and the words, "Clown Car for Justice." Now he drives it in parades. Kids throw candy from the windows. People cheer. Justice. Has a sense of humor sometimes. As for Karen, she's awaiting sentencing. No more clipboard, no badge, just orange and silence. But the story doesn't end with her, because the truth is, it never was about her. It was about us. About what happens when fear meets resistance. When one person says no, loud enough to shake a system built on yes, ma'am. And when that no becomes we. So now, every time I step into that garden, every time I see children planting seeds in soil Sarah once loved, I know we didn't just survive Karen Blackwood. We buried her empire in the roots of something better, and it's still growing. You'd think when a monster falls, the story ends, but what no one tells you is that monsters don't always die cleanly. Sometimes they leave shadows behind. It started small. A letter slipped under my door. No envelope, no return address, just a single sentence, typed in bold black ink. Some of us preferred order. I laughed at first. Then I found a second note. This time pinned to the side of my barn with a knife. You may have won the battle, but the neighborhood still remembers who kept it safe. After everything, the arrests, the hearings, the national attention, I wanted to believe it was just leftover anger. Some bitter ex-board member struggling with irrelevance. But deep down, I felt it. This wasn't over. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the kids watered the garden, I noticed a drone hovering above our property. Too low. Too deliberate. It wasn't Marcus's. His models had signature red lights. This one had no lights. Just silence. Watching. I called out to it, stepped toward it. It zipped backward, fast, disappearing into the trees behind the Cooper house. Marcus confirmed. It later, not mine. Someone built that from scratch. No serial, no registry. He paused. Jake, that's military-level precision. I felt the old chill return. We'd torn down Karen's empire. But someone was trying to build something in its place. Someone who'd learned from her mistakes. No fake badges this time. No HOA logos, just shadows. I went to Deputy Rodriguez, told him everything, the notes, the drone, the feeling in my gut that something was circling again. He took a deep breath. You know what the scariest thing about Karen was? He said. It wasn't that she believed she was right. It's that she convinced other people she was. I nodded slowly. She planted seeds, I said. And now they're growing back. Rodriguez tapped the hilt of his badge. Well, then let's do some weeding. We started investigating quietly. He pulled public records, looked for unusual real estate activity, private security permits, vendor requests. What he found? Terrifying. 5 new LLCs had been registered in the past month, all in nearby counties, all with names like Civic Solutions, Community Order Group, and Neighborhood Priority Services, all connected to a single anonymous trust, and all listing Karen, Blackwood's former legal counsel, as the registration agent. Jake, Rodriguez said. They're rebuilding, not in Sunset Ridge but nearby, quietly, professionally, without the Karen theatrics. They're going corporate, I muttered. And they're smarter this time. Smarter, he agreed, but not invisible. We reached out to Director Palmer at the DOJ. He connected the dots faster than we could. It turned out, in the wake of Karen's collapse, a vacuum had opened up. Dozens of small-time HOA tyrants across the country had been watching. Waiting. Taking notes, and now? They were collaborating, pooling resources, launching something bigger, more sophisticated. They weren't calling themselves HOAs anymore. They called it Community Resilience Infrastructure. And Sunset Ridge, it had become their origin myth. Their rallying cry. They were telling their followers that we were the ones who'd destroyed law and order, that we had created anarchy, that we were dangerous, we were the cautionary tale. And suddenly, the garden didn't feel like enough. Palmer sat with us one night, me, Marcus, Rodriguez, and Patricia, under string lights near the compost. Beds. We're tracking them, he said. But they're careful. They've learned to bury their authority inside private contracts, service agreements, arbitration clauses. They don't need fake badges anymore, Patricia added. They just need a line in the lease. That's when I realized something awful. Karen had used a clipboard and a camera. These new players? They were using legal ink and silence, and they were still winning. Even now. I stood that night in front of our community board and made the hardest speech of my life. We cannot assume the war is over, I said. We've taken down one empire. But others are learning from it, adapting, watching. If we don't stay vigilant, this could all come back, just under a different name. A woman in the back raised her hand. Mrs. Whitman. One of the few who had actually liked the old HOA. Jake. I'm tired, she said. I just want quiet. I want my street back. You've made this neighborhood a symbol, but some of us didn't want a movement. We wanted a lawn. There it was. The truth. Some people missed the silence of tyranny more than they valued the noise of freedom, and that was terrifying. That night, a fire was set in the compost shed. We were lucky it didn't spread. Lily had forgotten her sketchbook inside and went back to get it. She smelled the smoke first. The firefighters found an empty gas can under the deck, no fingerprints, no witnesses, but a note was burned into the door. Chaos breeds fire. You started this. Ethan was silent at dinner. After everyone else went to bed, he sat beside me on the porch. Dad, are we safe? His voice was so small, so different from the boy who used to believe that raised beds could change the world. Reached over, held his hand. Being safe, I said, doesn't always mean hiding. Sometimes it means standing exactly where you are and letting them see you're not moving. He nodded. Didn't say anything else. But the next morning, he was the first one out in the garden, hammering new beams, painting signs. Lily joined him. We don't hide, she said. The fire had only made them stronger. Patricia began writing new legislation. Palmer reached out to national municipalities. Marcus doubled the drone patrols. This time not to spy, but to protect. And I went back to the dirt, because some wars are fought with weapons, but some are fought with roots. The letters started again, but this time, they weren't threats. They were calls for help. Dozens, then hundreds. Families, veterans, widows, young parents, people asking how to start a freedom garden of their own, how to resist without burning down everything, how to build without fear, and I finally understood. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a blueprint. The Karen Blackwoods of the world would keep rising, but so would we. Every time they built walls, we'd plant another row. Every time they installed cameras, we'd install compost. Every time they said comply, we'd say grow. Because no clipboard, no badge, no fake cruiser or corporate charter can stop a garden once it starts to bloom. They called it the flashpoint. It started with a town called Greenvale, a quiet suburb in North Carolina that looked, on the surface, just like Sunset Ridge had. Manicured lawns, smiling mailboxes, silent streets, but beneath the surface, rot. Greenvale had fallen to one of the new community resilience infrastructure groups. Not an HOA, legally, but something worse. Their bylaws were buried in rental agreements. Their surveillance came wrapped in the language of safety. And their enforcers wore no badges, just suits and silence. They didn't fine residents. They sued them. One family, the Donovans, had planted a native flower bed for pollinators. Weeks later, they received a cease and desist from Community. Grounds and Integrity. It claimed their yard violated a landscaping clause that didn't appear in their lease until after they signed it. When they refused to remove the flowers, their rent was tripled. When they tried to organize with other residents, they were evicted. And when they live-streamed the confrontation, something terrifying happened. 2 men in gray suits showed up in the middle of the night. No names, no conversation, just bolt cutters and silence. They cut the power. The feed went dark, and the next morning, the Donovans were gone. No word, no trace, no answers. That's when it hit me. Sunset Ridge wasn't the climax of this story. It was the prologue. The Donovans' disappearance made national headlines, and people started asking questions, but not loud enough, not fast enough. So we got louder. We launched the Garden Rebellion Collective. At first, it was just Sunset Ridge and a few communities that had already dismantled their HOAs. We coordinated, documented, built toolkits for other neighborhoods to follow, but it wasn't enough. These new HOA replacements, these corporate-run resilience initiatives, had money, lawyers, private security, influence. We had compost, bins, and community meetings until Patricia stepped in. She stood at a town hall meeting in front of 3 state senators, held up a burned piece of wood from our shed, the one that had been torched in that shadowy retaliation, and said, "If your silence is worth buying, just name your price. But understand this, me near the people out there, they're planting more than gardens. They're planting revolutions." The room went dead silent, and the tide began to turn. Rodriguez was asked to testify before the Department of Justice's Housing Integrity Subcommittee. Marcus joined a tech task force with federal oversight powers, exposing illegal surveillance devices masked as smart neighborhood tech. And I was invited to sit across from the very people who once ignored my letters. The Department of Urban Development, the Attorney General's Office, the Federal Ethics Committee. They asked me the question I'd been preparing to answer for 2 years. "Mr. Fletcher, what do you want?" I didn't hesitate. I want people to feel safe in their own homes without fearing their neighbors. I want parents to raise children without drones watching their bedrooms. I want gardens, not enforcement zones. And I want you to stop pretending this is a local problem when it's a national infection. It made headlines. Texas farmer declares war on shadow HOAs. But I didn't care about headlines anymore. I cared about impact. And that's when something happened I never expected. One of Karen's former allies came forward. His name was Michael Travers. He'd worked with Karen in a fake HOA network in Nevada. He showed up at one of our open garden days, uninvited, unarmed, hands shaking. "I helped build this," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I designed the leasing language. I drew the maps. I thought it was just bureaucracy. I didn't know what she was using it for. We gave him water, listened, and then we gave him a voice. He testified before Congress exposed shell corporations, named names. His statement rocked the country. We called it community protection. But we were building control systems. Karen may have been the architect, but there are others. Bigger, smarter. You need to start treating this like organized crime, because that's what it is. That's when the raids started, one by one. New Jersey, Utah, California, Illinois. Each with a different community solutions company. Each run by executives hiding behind layers of contracts and fake boards, but they weren't prepared for resistance. Not like this. Because this time, the communities fought back. They organized. They filmed. They shouted, "No more shadows," from rooftops and porches and overgrown lawns that refused to be tamed. They planted in defiance. They composted in protest. And the garden rebellion became more than a movement. It became a reckoning. But then, out of nowhere, the pushback came. Smear campaigns. News stories painting me as a radical. Old footage of the helicopter incident edited to make it look like I was inciting violence instead of trying to save a life. Social media bots flooded our pages. You destroyed law and order. You hate structure. What's wrong with a little oversight? They called us anarchists. They called us a cult. They called Sarah's garden a symbol of chaos. That was the hardest day. I stood in the field, the same field where Karen had tried to block a rescue, and felt something I hadn't felt since the beginning. Fear. What if we'd pushed too far? What if they were winning again? This time not with badges, but with stories. Marcus found me there. "Hey," he said. "Remember what Sarah said?" I looked at him. He repeated it softly. "You don't fight darkness by yelling at it. You fight it by turning on the lights." He handed me a USB drive. "It's time we show them everything." Inside was the full unedited drone archive from Sunset Ridge. Every camera, every file, every message Karen ever sent, every surveillance angle, every forged form, every dollar stolen. We released it online. No press release, no warning, just truth, raw, untouched, undeniable. Within hours, it went viral. Inside the surveillance state of suburbia. HOA gone, rogue, the full files. The Sunset Ridge tapes, public. Opinion flipped like a switch. Support flooded in. Petitions soared past 1 million signatures. State attorneys general who had stayed silent suddenly took action, and the Garden Rebellion was no longer a fringe movement. It was the future. That night, I stood at the front of our community garden, just a man in dirty jeans and old boots, and looked out at the faces of neighbors, journalists, activists, survivors. I took a breath. "This is about more than HOAs," I said. "It's about who gets to feel safe, who gets to be heard, and whether we let fake authority keep writing real pain into people's lives." And then I paused, because in the back row, I saw someone I hadn't expected. Ethan, standing next to Lily, both holding signs they'd painted themselves. Ethan's read, "Our home is not your business." Lily said, "Let gardens grow." I smiled. Sarah's legacy wasn't just a patch of tomatoes and cucumbers, it was this, a seed planted in defiance, now in full bloom and still growing. 1 month after we released the Sunset Ridge files, the movement exploded. News outlets couldn't keep up. Every day, new stories surfaced. Children filmed through bedroom windows, families priced out of their homes by compliance fees, senior EI, citizens sued into silence. The country had seen enough, and for the first time since this war began, it wasn't just us fighting, it was everyone, teachers, nurses, vets, grocery clerks, lawyers, grandparents, teenagers. Garden signs began appearing across the country like silent declarations of resistance. No cameras, no tyrants, just tomatoes. Lawn, not law. Freedom grows here. And then came the moment we didn't see coming. Director Palmer summoned us to Washington. It wasn't a hearing. It wasn't a press conference. It was something else entirely. A closed-door meeting with the Department of Justice, the FBI, and members of the White House Community Oversight Task Force. We sat at a long table in a room that smelled like fresh paint and politics. Patricia, Marcus, Rodriguez, myself, and 2 survivors from Greenvale. Across from us, the country's highest-ranking federal law enforcement officials. Palmer didn't waste time. "We've uncovered a central node," he said. "Not Karen, not Trevor, something bigger." He tapped a key on his laptop. A logo appeared on the screen. A Mary Struct Community Management. It looked harmless, corporate, slick. A website with smiling couples, green grass, and links to neighborhood solutions. But behind it, a criminal network spanning 31 states. Palmer broke it down. A Mary Struct was a holding company, a parent shell with over 200 subsidiaries, each one registered under a different name, each controlling multiple residential zones across the U.S. fake HOAs. Real authority, they enforced surveillance, fines, and evictions. They laundered money through fake vendors. They filed lawsuits using arbitration clauses hidden in lease agreements. They targeted families who couldn't afford to fight back. And they used Karen's playbook as their foundation. Sunset Ridge was their prototype, Palmer said. And when it failed, they went darker, quieter, more digital, less visible. He clicked again. A map appeared. Pins on every state, some red, some orange, some black. The black ones, active federal investigations. The red ones, confirmed shell operations. The orange, still unknown. I swallowed hard. "This is organized crime," I said. Palmer nodded. "With the structure of a corporation and the face of a neighborhood." Rodriguez leaned forward. "What do you want from us?" Palmer didn't blink. "We want you to lead the public exposure." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I'm a farmer, a widower. I've been planting cucumbers while they've been building empires. Palmer's voice dropped low. "And that's why they never saw you coming." He turned to Patricia. "You'll represent the legal front. Marcus, the tech angle. Rodriguez, the enforcement failures. Jake, you're the voice, the story, the proof that this movement has heart." It felt impossible, but we all nodded, because we knew what was at stake. 2 weeks later, the campaign launched, Operation Clean Soil. It wasn't just a PR push, it was a coordinated federal action. Over 500 raids across 31 states seized servers, arrested executives, dismantled shell companies, and a simultaneous national broadcast. I stood on a stage in a restored high school auditorium in Austin, Texas. Microphones, cameras, a crowd of survivors. I looked out across the faces, some tear-streaked, some angry, all tired, and I began. 2 years ago, a woman tried to stop a rescue helicopter from landing in my backyard. She waved a fake badge. Claimed she had the authority to block medical care for a dying boy. I paused. She said it was about safety. But it was about power, control, fear. I held up a faded photo. Sarah in the garden, sun in her hair, dirt on her hands. She believed in growth, in trust, in neighbors, not watchers. I looked straight into the lens. If someone's filming your family without consent, that's not safety, it's surveillance. If someone fines you for planting food, that's not order, it's oppression. And if someone tells you they have authority but can't show you where it came from, that's not leadership. It's fraud. The crowd erupted. People stood, cheered, cried, and all across the country, communities that had been silent began to rise. In Indiana, a retired couple tore down the fences around their flower beds and invited neighbors in. In Arizona, a teen hacked into a local surveillance network and exposed 47 hidden cameras, all paid for with HOA fees. In Florida, a woman who had once been fined for putting up Halloween decorations organized the state's largest anti-HOA rally to date. Sunset Ridge wasn't just a story anymore. It was a symbol. And then the final domino fell. A Mary Struct's CEO, a man who had never once been seen publicly, was arrested at his lake house in Colorado. His name? Vincent Hale. He had 12 passports, 27 LLCs, and had funneled $96 million through community enhancement contracts. He was charged with racketeering, cyber intrusion, tax evasion, child endangerment, wire fraud, and obstruction of emergency services. In his private vault, a copy of Karen Blackwood's original HOA charter, signed in her handwriting. Laminated, framed, she had been his prototype, his pioneer, his queen. And now, she was rotting in a federal cell. He was on his way to join her. And the rest of us? We were free. Truly, finally, free. I walked through the community garden that night under a sky full of stars. Lily was asleep. Ethan was out back, sketching a new compost design. Patricia sat with me on the porch, barefoot, sipping wine. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "No." "We did." She smiled. "You know, if you ever wanted to run for office, don't push it," I laughed. And then, silence. Beautiful, unbroken silence. Not the kind Karen once enforced. The kind Sarah once believed in. The kind that lives in truth. That breathes in freedom. That can't be cut down or fined or surveilled or painted. Beige, the kind of silence you earn after a storm. The sign went up quietly. No ribbon cutting, no press, no ceremony, just 4 simple words, carved into cedar and posted at the edge of the garden. Sarah's place. Freedom grows here. Lily painted it herself. Ethan planted a circle of sunflowers around the base, and I stood there with a hammer in one hand and my heart in the other, knowing this was how it ends, not with a speech, not with a viral clip, but with a name etched into wood surrounded by everything she loved. The war was over. Really over. Karen Blackwood, aka Brenda Kowalski, had been sentenced to 47 years in federal prison. She never spoke during the trial, not once. She just stared straight ahead as prosecutors read off a list of victims long enough to echo. Trevor Hammerstein was already 2 years into his 12-year sentence. According to the last report I saw, he was teaching yoga in the prison yard. The real puppeteer, Vincent Hale, pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have lasted years. The judge called his operation the most brazen abuse of private power ever uncovered in modern American housing. Ameristruct was dissolved, every contract voided, every surveillance camera seized, and as for Sunset Ridge, well, it's not called that anymore. We renamed it Hollow Ridge, a nod to what it had become under Karen's rule. A name that carried the memory of what we lost, but also what we rebuilt. The HOA was never replaced. Instead, we formed something different, a community circle, an open voluntary association. No enforcement, no fines, just people, neighbors, human beings trying to live next to each other without becoming monsters. No one had to join, but everyone did. And not because they were afraid, because they finally felt safe enough to belong. Every Tuesday, we gather in the garden. We talk about upcoming events, new planting rotations, kids' birthdays, compost schedules, rainwater systems. Sometimes we just sit in silence, letting the bees and the breeze do the talking. There are no rules, just trust. Rodriguez retired early, said he wanted to spend more time being a dad than a deputy. He still volunteers with the Garden Rebellions. Safety Initiative, training citizens to spot coercive language in leases, detect hidden cameras, and file community audits without fear. Betty Kowalski moved to Oregon to live with her sister. She and I still write letters. Sometimes she sends packages, old books Sarah would have loved, seed samples, a photograph of her standing in a garden that looks a little too much like ours to be coincidence. Patricia stayed. More than stayed. She built a raised bed behind her house and filled it with lavender and basil. She tutors kids from the neighborhood now, teaching them how law really works and how to challenge it when it doesn't. She and I still sit on the porch some nights, sipping iced tea and talking about nothing in particular. Sometimes we hold hands. It's gentle, quiet, healing. Marcus got a call from a nonprofit in DC. They asked him to help design a surveillance detection system for public housing. He said yes, but only if he could do it from home. His clown car for justice is now parked next to a chicken coop he built with Ethan last spring. We still laugh about it. That pink Ford Crown Vic with rainbow decals might be the most effective. Piece of protest art in modern history. Lily's drawing of it ended up on a t-shirt that raised over $50,000 for legal aid funds. She signed each one in Sharpie with a little flower next to her name. Ethan? He's taller than me now. 15, smarter than he knows, more serious than a boy should be, but still light when he laughs. He built a solar irrigation grid for the garden last fall. Said he wanted to give something back. He speaks at schools now. Tells our story better than I ever could. One time I asked him if he was proud of everything we did. He said, "No, Dad. I'm proud of what we're still doing." That stuck with me. Because that's what this really is, isn't it? Ongoing. A garden doesn't just grow once, it needs tending. Water, patience, forgiveness. So does freedom, so does trust, so do people. The letters still come, though not as often. Some from families just beginning their fight. Others from survivors who finally found their voice. They tell me things like, "I planted my first tomato today. We tore down the HOA sign and put up a library instead. Thank you for showing us it was okay to say no." I never know how to respond, so I send seeds. Sunflowers, basil, heirloom tomatoes. A note that simply says, "Let it grow." And somehow, that feels like enough. Last week, I visited Sarah's grave, brought fresh lavender, planted a ring of rosemary. Around the base, I told her everything about the movement, the raids, the stage in Austin, the night we all stood in the garden and sang until our voices cracked, about Patricia, about Ethan and Lily, about the way the sun hits the beans at sunset and makes it feel like she's still brushing the tops with her fingertips. Told her we won. But I also told her it wasn't really about winning. It was about holding on to decency, to community, to home. And as I sat there, dirt under my nails, I realized something I hadn't said out loud until that moment. I kept my promise, Sarah. I stood, brushed the dirt from my jeans, and felt light again, lighter than I had in years. Because for the first time since she passed, the world felt honest. And for the first time since the clipboard came marching across our lawn, I wasn't afraid of anyone watching, because there was no one left to fear. Not really. The power was back where it belonged, in porches, in gardens, in birthday parties and compost bins and community potlucks where people bring more than they take. In the hands of ordinary folks who had been quiet too long and who now knew how to make noise. The sun dipped below the horizon as I walked back through the field, past the apple trees Sarah planted, past the kids' art wall, past the compost heap, past the rows of carrots and peppers and squash and okra. And there, right at the edge of the community circle, a boy I didn't recognize was holding his mother's hand. He pointed at the garden and asked, "Mom, is this where it all happened?" She nodded. He whispered, "It's beautiful." She smiled. It wasn't always, but now it is. I walked past them, tipping my hat. She turned to me and said, "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher." I didn't have the words, so I just nodded, because I knew what she meant. She wasn't thanking me for a war. She was thanking me for a garden. And I realized that's what we'd built all along. Not a protest, not a rebellion, not even a movement, but something bigger, something rooted, something permanent, something that would outlive all of us. A place where no one could be watched without consent, where no child would be targeted for playing too loud, where no father would ever again have to pull a helicopter from the sky just to save a life, where freedom wasn't enforced, it was nurtured, where trust wasn't demanded, it was earned, and where peace didn't come from silence. It came from planting the right things, in the right soil, with the right people, and letting it grow.